So what's interesting is that we've had all of this technology that's been released into the marketplace, but there's predictably a lag time before it changes the world. And to put that in perspective, if you look at all technology taking about 15 years to have a big impact, Google's only about 17, 18 years old. So it's only just crossed that curve of being a 15-year-old technology. Facebook's not yet a 15-year-old technology. Your smartphone's not yet a 15-year-old technology. So, you know, this huge shift is yet to happen or is about to happen. There's no question that in the next 15 years you'll see more transformation on the planet by a long shot compared to the last 15 years. And most people think that the last 15 years were quite transformational. The next 15 years are a lot more transformational. There's 4 big trends I want to highlight that I think every entrepreneur should be aware of going into the next 15 years. The first one is that the baby boomers begin turning 70. So the baby boom was 1946 to 1964, and this is what the demographic chart looks like from the time. So the baby boomers come along and then boom, lots of babies come into the marketplace. So in 2016, that's where we are right now, and what happens is a huge lump of people begin turning 70 in 2016. And why that's important is because the psychological shift of wealth accumulation and asset accumulation versus asset liquidation and actually selling down assets in order to live is a big psychological shift. All assets in the world, of all of the assets in the world, baby boomers in the Western world, baby boomers own about 2/3 of all the assets. So if a big percentage of people are turning 70 and they're wanting to sell things that they were previously buying, it creates a lot of downward pressure in the market. Millennials don't want to grow up. So millennials basically could care less about all the things they're meant to care about at the moment. So for example, they love something called access versus ownership. So millennials are more excited by the idea of having limitless Uber credit than owning a really flashy car. Millennials love the idea of traveling around the world cheaply as opposed to owning a house and settling down. Statistically, millennials settle down much, much later. They get married much, much later. They have less kids. They have kids much, much later. So their mindset is very, very different. They grew up in different times. They're excited by different things to what their parents were excited by. Millennials also grew up in a time where education or tertiary education was almost considered essential but not free. So a lot of millennials enter their 20s and their 30s saddled with a lot of student debt, which means they can't go and buy up all the houses that their parents want to sell or their grandparents want to sell. So you have this downward pressure of I'd like to sell my family home so I can retire, and you have the millennials saying I'd like to rent it for a night on Airbnb but nothing more. The third trend to look at is what's called technology unemployment. So we're living in a world at the moment where up until this point technology has definitely made the human brain more efficient. So an accountant working with a computer is a more efficient accountant. A doctor working with the internet is a more efficient doctor. However, we're going into a time where computers are actually getting to the point where they can just simply replace what we do. So they're getting smart enough to do replacing as opposed to assisting, or automation versus efficiency. So as an example, the human brain works at 10 to the 16th cycles per second, and a personal computer that you buy for $1,000 will operate at 10 to the 16th cycles per second by about 2020, 2021, based on Moore's law. So a $1,000 personal computer will be as have the same sort of brute force as the human brain as at about 2020. So a lot of predictions say that 40% of our total workforce or beyond, 47% of our total workforce can be completely automated. When they look at the tasks that people perform, it's not hard to automate those tasks. So that's a huge percentage of the workforce. A lot of people say to me, well, technology is creating jobs, and that's completely inaccurate. Technology doesn't create many jobs. If you look at Walmart, Walmart is a low-tech solution, 2.2 million people work there. Amazon, more technology, 150,000 people work there but serve more people. Vodafone employs 100,000 people, and its biggest text message competitor now, who serves a lot more people, 1 billion users, only has 180 employees. So WhatsApp is not even a rounding error for a company like Vodafone. News Corp's got 50,000 people, Facebook's got 10,000 people. Hilton Hotels have got 155,000 employees. Airbnb has 3 times more rooms available every night and only has 2,000 employees. Avis has got 30,000 people with its fleet of cars. Uber's got a much bigger fleet of cars and only employs 3,500 people. Sky has 30,000 people working in its cable television network, and Netflix has a much bigger audience and it's 2,200 people. So technology doesn't necessarily create jobs. Technology creates opportunities for entrepreneurs, and the world's going through a lot of change and a lot of transformation. I found this image quite interesting, which is that in 2005 to 2014, this particular microchip technology grew 1,000-fold in just 9 years. So it went from 128 megabyte chips to 128 gigabyte chips in 9 years. So that's a 1,000 times increase in nine years. And when you apply Moore's law to a number of technologies that are hitting the market at the moment, it's quite fascinating. So something like Siri, which is in your phone and is pretty useless at the moment. There's not a huge degree of people who use Siri to do many things. We sit there and we don't think of Siri as a big threat. But if it doubles every 18 months in its effectiveness and becomes 10 times more effective and then 20 more effective, 40 times more effective, after a few doubles, Siri becomes so effective that it's as effective as a PA. It's as effective as a human being pretty quickly for a lot of tasks. We now have factories that are fully automated, and the only people who work there are the people who repair the machines. This is a company I'm involved in. It's called BizEquity. Big data solutions where computers solve very complicated, complex problems by having access to a lot of data. So we have access to 29 million records for what companies should be valued at. And because we have so much data on what companies are worth, we can now pinpoint pretty much what a company should sell for or what its valuation is in under 20 minutes worth of someone filling in a form and just learning a few little things about that business. We can use the big data to figure out what it's worth. So that's a function that used to be performed by an accountant, it takes 6 weeks and $5,000, and now we do it in under an hour for very, very cheap. This is called Babylon. It connects through an app GPs, general practitioners to sick people through their phone. This will be an interesting technology because if you look at Africa, Africa has 3% of the world's doctors but 25% of the world's sick people. So using technology to solve the problem of having GPs available will be a really powerful breakthrough. We have all the systems in place to scale intellectual property. So anyone who comes up with some intellectual property can protect it, scale it, develop it really quickly, really rapidly. So this is the kind of technology environment we're going into where ideas in Singapore can come and compete with ideas here in the UK very quickly, very rapidly, and with protection. When you add up all of those things, you end up with a problem called government austerity. So government austerity basically means that all the advisors are telling government that you've got the baby boomers putting a lot of pressure on health, so you've got to be really careful with policy around health. You've got a lot of people leaving the taxable workforce. You've got globalization thanks to technology moving the taxable entities overseas. So there's all this problem that will take 5 to 10 years to figure out. And up until that point, they're going to basically have to keep a pretty tight leash on how they spend their money. We're going into a lot of change in the next 15 years. So how do you run your business in that change? I describe this as like a big wave that's happening in the economy, and you've got to learn to surf it versus get swept out to sea by it. So this is one way of looking at it is threat, and the other way of looking at it is the greatest shift in wealth in all of history. So more money, more wealth is going to shift in the next 15 years than all of human history combined. On top of this, we have some really positive things that are happening, which is there's 3 billion people who are going to join the internet in the next 5 years. People who are going to want to buy things, they're going to want to create and contribute and collaborate. They're all joining the internet. So this is, the internet's going to double in size thanks to things like Facebook and internet.org. In the next 15 years, you've got the Giving Pledge predicted that 138 people are going to give away 610 billion to good causes. We're on the cusp of free energy. So when you have electricity from solar, you also have clean water because you can desalinate incredibly cheaply. You've got free transportation, you've got free computing power. So a lot of the limitations that we previously perceived in the last 100 years disappear when you have free energy. And you've actually got companies now creating solar solutions where you can pretty much be off the grid using a battery and a solar panel if you live in the right climate. Probably not for London anytime soon, but certain parts of the world you can get off the grid pretty quickly, and a lot of the parts of the world that are developing will go straight to solar as opposed to other forms of electricity. We have this thing called the entrepreneur revolution happening. So lots and lots of talented people are out there solving meaningful problems with entrepreneurship. We have in the UK 1.2 million new businesses have been started in the last 10 years. We have this direct access to funding where we have crowdfunding available. So businesses that want money can put together a crowdfunding project and raise money very rapidly. And that's growing at Moore's law, so it's exponentially growing. So crowdfunding is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's doubling every 18 months. So there's a lot of interesting, exciting things fueling this big wave, as well as things that are kind of a bit nerve-wracking. So that's the big picture.